Good afternoon, everyone. So
Hi. Hello.
thank you guys for participating in this event. A special shout out to the chief and Miss Arnita for joining us as well as Miss Ashley Greer from the Family Justice Center. How are you doing, Miss Greer?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So I guess we will wait a few minutes to see if more participants join us. And then I'll turn it over to Miss Naja Majors, our moderator, to get things started.
Quick question. Students have to be logged into their Blackboard account in order to access this, right?
No, they do not. They simply have to click the link like you did.
Okay.
So one thing that they will need to do, because hopefully they receive the link through their PGCC student email account. So that's what they'll have to log into. And we try to do it in that way as a way to provide additional protection that students have to do, and so that we don't get what is that Zoom photo bombed or whatever the technology allows these days. So that allows for more security.
All right, Naja, we could get started and hopefully we'll get some more participants shortly.
My bad. I was doing some promo. But okay, that's fine. I was trying to get some students to get on. So, can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
So I'm not sure if we should have all the microphones muted unless you're speaking. Is that an advice I should give? Because I don't want there to be any static. Because right now it sounds like a little bit of static on my phone. Is that better? Can somebody just, Kim, can you be the person to verify, or someone else?
I can hear you.
Okay. So welcome everybody to the Purple Night Lights Roundtable discussion. We'll be discussing domestic violence, abuse, and how it's relevant to our lives, directly or indirectly, and what we can do to bring awareness to the topic and provide some resources that the college has for students, faculty, staff, friends, family, etc. My name is Naja Majors. I am a PGCC alum, as well as a current employee with the SAGE department. So I am going to be facilitating this. I'll do a brief introduction. I have some introductions for some of the panelists, but some of the other ones will just be their title. So we have the Chief of Police, Grayling Williams. Mr. Grayling Williams, could you say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Is there anything else you want me to say?
You can give us a 1 or 2 sentence, description or fun fact.
Description or fun? So I've been in law enforcement since 1981. It was Yale University campus police back then. But after about 7, 8 years, I went to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and I was a DEA special agent for 22 years. I retired. I worked for Baltimore City PD as the chief of internal affairs. Then I was in Pennsylvania on the governor's cabinet, and I actually did some time as a presidential appointee with the Department of Homeland Security, where I worked for the Secretary of Homeland Security during the Obama administration.
Okay, resume on point.
Yeah, can I get a job?
Pretty good. Next we have Lieutenant Barbara Smith. Lieutenant Smith, hi everybody.
Coming in kind of staticky. Hello, everyone. I've got about over 15 years in law enforcement. I've been with the college for about 9 years. I started out with the city of Hyattsville. I was on the community action team. I was also a background investigator. And I did a lot of community policing. And then I also, was a part-time officer at Capitol Heights Police Department, and I did a lot of their community policing programs, domestic violence, and a lot of the community engagement. Just trying to get the community involved. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Smith. Next, we have Dr. Danielle LaShaw Bryant, who's a counselor in the Wellness Center. Doctor.
Hello. Yes, I'm Dr. Danielle LaShaw Bryant, one of the counselors in the Wellness Center. I've been doing counseling for more than 20 years now, helping adults, children, and families with mental health issues, crises, disorders, and just general overall well-being and functioning. So looking forward to being a part of this panel today. Certainly, it is something that is necessary and needed. And so looking forward to participating. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have DeVell Kent. Mr. Kent. He's the counselor.
Thank you.
He's also a counselor.
Thank you, Naja. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Devel Kent. I am one of the counselors with PGCC Counseling Services under the Wellness Center. I've been in behavioral health services for 11 years. I've spent 5 years working in a correctional facility doing mental health counseling. I've done 5 years of addictions counseling. I've worked in community psychiatry for individuals with chronic mental illnesses. I worked on college campuses. So I'm very excited about today to participate on a topic that's just very important. And, thank you for having me.
Thank you for participating. I like to mute my mic, so sorry for many delay. But next we have Miss Arnita Shelton, who's a registered nurse from the Wellness Center. I do have a for you, but you can introduce yourself. I think this is more efficient.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Arnita Shelton. I'm a registered nurse. I am also a PGCC alumni from the nursing program. I've been a nurse over 40 years. I work on the campus of PG College as the campus nurse. I'm also a sexual assault forensic examiner nurse, which means that I do rape exams for clients in PG County. I've been a safe nurse for 17 years, and I do children, men, women, everybody, basically. And I'm excited. This is one of my passions. I'm excited to be here and able to participate and answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for participating. And but not least, we have Miss Ashley Greer. Am I saying that right? Greer?
Yes, you said it correct. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ashley Greer. I serve as the Outreach and Volunteer Coordinator here at the Family Justice Center. For those who do not know, the FJC is a multi-service center for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and elder abuse. Any services anyone going through those situations needs, we have it right here in a one-stop shop facility. I'm so passionate about our teen empowerment program and educating teens and young adults about the issue of domestic violence and teen dating violence. So I'm glad to be here.
Am I back? You know what? This is why I don't like technology. Am I back? Oh, sorry. I'm back. Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm sorry about that. Can I- The sound is going on. Yeah, going on. I have my Wi-Fi on the stable charge. But if you can hear me, write something. Is it clear? Can you hear me? Is that clear now? Okay. I don't know what else I can do. Today. I'm not sure what's going on here.
You're just a little staticky. We can hear you. We can hear you tapping on the computer.
This is clear. Maybe I should get. Let me see. Hello? Is this working?
So this is Dr. Danielle. As Naja is getting her technology together, Kim, have we finished introducing the panel?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Mr. Presley couldn't make it as originally
Okay.
planned. So,
Okay. All right. Good enough.
so we could delve right into the questions while we wait for Naja to fix her technological difficulties. And we could start off by if someone on the panel can provide a definition of what domestic violence is and the signs of domestic violence, if we could get started with that question.
Excellent. Okay.
So, Ms. Arnita or Ms. Greer, can you provide us with your definition?
Sure, I'll take that question. So I always like to give the standard definition, and domestic violence is basically defined as any form of abusive behavior in a relationship that is utilized by one person to gain or maintain power and control over the other partner. That could be an intimate partner or immediate family member. And one thing you always want to remember when it comes to domestic violence are two key words: power and control. One person is always trying to exhibit power and control over the other person. So whenever someone is trying to use power and control over the other person, that is always a sure sign that domestic violence is taking place. And how can you identify it? I think first, in order to identify domestic violence, you have to understand that domestic violence is not just physical violence. So you need to understand that domestic violence, it's psychological, it is sexual, it is financial, it is emotional as well. So in order to identify, you have to be aware of all the forms of domestic violence.
Ms. Arnita, can you add to what Ms. Greer the information Ms. Greer just provided? All right.
Nurse Arnita, you might be on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I sure was. I agree with what Ms. Ashley said. Most people think that abuse is just the physical, but it is all of the ones that she mentioned. But the physical one is the one that most people think about, which is the pushing and the hitting and the strangling and throwing objects. But the other ones, the verbal and the sexual and the spiritual, financial and emotional ones, are just as bad. When I do my cases, I seem to find that the emotional one is one that most of the young ladies, which are not the only ones that are abused, but they're the ones that are going through the ones of the person saying that they're ugly, they won't be anything, and the jealousy and the isolation. But the other ones are truly forms of abuse.
Okay, and then Dr. Davis, Dr. Bryant or DeVille, can you provide us with an example of the emotional abuse that Ms. Greer alluded to in her definition and how that can impact the victim?
And how to identify it?
Certainly. I think my colleague can go ahead and fill that one. I'm going to go ahead behind the scenes and put up a visual for that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Kim. Well, looking at emotional, or as we call psychological abuse, you're dealing with a verbal component that an individual is being aggressive and utilizing the type of tactics to quote unquote tear down your self-esteem, create a sense of dominance using intimidation and choosing, words and manipulation. Also, utilizing a sense of neglect. So remember, Ms. Greer talked about a sense of power and control. And power and control could be used by just physical stature, the intimidation piece. Power and control could also be used as, utilizing threats to the individual, A person may be threatened that I may harm your family. I may do something physical to you. I may cut you off financially. So when you are abusing an individual and using a sense of neglect and a sense of intimidation that tears a person's self-esteem down, tears a person's confidence down, what that does is it puts the abuser and the perpetrator in a sense of dominance. Now this individual feels a sense of hyper apprehension to do anything. You know, some signs or some impacts of that could be a sense of emotional distress, disturbances in sleep, disturbances in lack of confidence. Some individuals, from my experience, have experienced or suffered from eating disorders, paranoia, a sense of anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, individuals losing a sense of interest in things that was once important to them or something that they were heavily engaged in. And so a lot of times in my experience, especially when working in the community psychiatry environment, and really pretty much in any environment when you're dealing with physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, one of the most under-detected and reported forms would be the psychological emotional piece because there isn't any physical wounds. And, you know, I would dare to say that, you know, all forms of this physical abuse or all forms of abuse in itself, you know, have equal impact. But the ones that don't show physical proof are the ones that are harder to identify and the ones that individuals may not even feel as though or understand that it's actual abuse because there isn't a physical component to it. Or if there's a financial component to it, a person may not connect the dots and understand that they're being a victim of domestic violence. And so some other things that you may see from an individual that's experiencing this particular situation, they may feel that they're to blame. They may feel that the abuse is their fault. And so they may use language or rationale to try to intellectualize a justification for them experiencing and receiving and being a victim of this abuse. Another component is I've had clients, male and female, that subscribe to the understanding or the false understanding that they deserve being abused because of something that they've done. So, you know, looking at that psychological piece, it's one of those that isn't so clearly defined in the community where a lot of individuals may not even realize that they are a victim of abuse because it's not outright physical. And so when you're looking at a psychological or an emotional impact, you know, sometimes it makes it harder to identify unless you actually have an individual that comes into your office and begins to disclose what's happening. Thank you, Kim.
Well, and sorry, Naja, but I
Well,
was,
that's
you can go ahead.
go on.
You can go ahead, Dr. Bryant.
Okay, Devel, wonderful. Yes, I couldn't have said it better. I would only add that another component, because of some of the specialized training that I have, we've identified that people can also can be abused spiritually. So there can be spiritual abuse. That spiritual abuse could look like keeping you away from your spiritual family as a source of support. And as you mentioned, Devel, individuals don't necessarily want you going around other people because they might see evidence. And so that's one indication in terms of spiritual abuse. Another is using sacred text against you to be able to justify the issue of power that they may have over you, as Ms. Greer indicated, and to keep you in that submissive role where you don't seek help and you don't try to better your situation. Now, and this can be both male and female, as Nurse Arnita pointed out. And so particularly in this time when we are behind closed doors, if you will, with the pandemic, some institutions of worship are just beginning to open up. And so individuals may be able then to find that support once again. But spiritual abuse can be real and can keep the person within that situation, having feelings of guilt, having feelings of anxiety, and having all sorts of emotional reactions.
And if I could, I'm sorry. If I could, I wanted to jump in on both what Dr. Bryan and Mr. Kent were saying. Excellent points. For the police, it's always the easiest avenue for the police into this is when there's actually a call to the police and there's physical violence that, you know, I can actually see the bruises and the scars and everything like that. Normally, what they just described usually doesn't involve bringing the police into the mix. Now, that's where the friends and the family come into play, because when you start to see that your friend or your family member, your loved one, when you start to see that their personality is changing, they used to be more outgoing, they used to be, you know, go to more family outings or family events, or they were more active in the church. When you start to see that person, you know, their personality changing, where they're becoming more withdrawn, especially if they start talking about, well, you know, he wouldn't like it if I did that, or she really doesn't want me involved in doing some of these things. You know, those may be key indicators, and I'll defer to the experts on the panel here, but I think that those are key indicators for both family and friends to, you know, be aware of. And I know that, you know, normally we don't like to, you know, push ourselves into somebody's relationship, but there's times when we have to, you know, say, wait a minute, something may be going on here, because, you know, this person has done a complete, you know, 180 from the way we knew them to be ever since they started, you know, this relationship with this particular individual.
Good point, Chief. Good point. Yes, I concur.
Yeah.
Great.
And one more thing I'd like to add. We as the professionals have to teach the public and our relatives and everyone about the different types. Because when I go to court, it's very hard. Everybody wants to see a black eye, no teeth, a broken arm, and that is not always the case. So that's what we have to teach about the different types of abuse, because that's what they look for. That's a lot of the questions from the defense attorney and everybody. Was she hit, or that type of thing? And that's not always the case as far as abuse.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Using the information from the first question, we're going to segue into the second question. Considering everything that was just said about identifying abuse outside of physical abuse, a lot of the times I've spoken to several of my college peers who are not on here like they were supposed to be. But they basically were saying in some communities there are social norms, and some of these social norms may be considered abuse. And the reason why they are more difficult to identify is not just because it's not visibly seen, but because in the pockets of their family, parents, their aunties and uncles, their cousins, they see some of these behaviors, the yelling and the screaming, the belittling, and that is considered normal. And so going into the second question, like what are the steps in assisting someone who is dealing with something like this, who may not even understand that it is abuse based on their social norms outside of school in their home communities?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I take this question?
Yes, ma'am.
When you want to assist a victim to leave the home, you know, you have to tread carefully. and make sure that you don't blame them, but you have to let them know that they don't deserve this type of treatment. And the most important thing is giving them a plan, letting them know that there's a plan B, making sure that they have that information. Because sometimes when you want to try to encourage a victim to leave, they're scared to leave because it might be that financial burden where they don't have the money and the other party is controlling everything. And then kids, when kids are involved. And then feeling like that they're going to be outcast from the family if they speak up and say something. So sometimes it takes several conversations with a victim to encourage them, to get them to leave, and letting them know that there are options out there, but also getting them to the point to where they feel confident enough to be able to leave.
Thank you. I guess directing this to any of the panelists who want to answer. In regards to assessing someone out of an abusive situation, in addition to patience, giving them an option, a plan B, how does identity come into play? How does confidence and I guess essentially self-esteem come into play with leading someone to understand that they do deserve to go to a plan B, or that they are worthy to get out of a toxic situation to be in a peaceful situation? So I guess that's the part 2 to the question, I guess.
Great questions, Naja. And I just would like to maybe back up a little bit and address a little bit of the inherent question that you had about family dynamics and the impact of how that plays itself out in terms of being a model for relationships.
Social norms within the community, absolutely.
Correct. So you're right. If you grow up in a household of screaming and yelling and battering, then even though you may dislike it and it may disgust you, and you will say, when I grow up, I'm not going to do that. Sometimes if that's your only model, that's what you resort to. I'm not saying that every person who comes from a battered home is a batterer. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is typically what you see in front of you is the model that you might emulate, unless there is something else shows you a different way. Another family member, a coach, a pastor, a counselor, someone who can say, what you're describing sounds like a very unhealthy relationship, sounds toxic, sounds dangerous. And let's unpack that to really see what it is that where your core beliefs are around that and how unhealthy that might be. So unhealthy coping behavior might look like the obvious, as Nurse Arnita said, with the battering, but it could also look like substance abuse. It could also look like neglect. And so these are some of the things to pay attention to, particularly young people, as you begin to look at starting your own relationships.
To your point, Dr. Bryant, I think it's important that we shouldn't come to the table with the understanding that every individual knows what abuse looks like. Some individuals, just like as you said, they may have grew up in an environment where verbal abuse is the norm and it's just normal. And so it's important that as individuals, we need to understand that having a network and a social network outside of your immediate environment is helpful, because sometimes someone has to show you that, this possibly isn't normal. And so people operate this way. Relationships aren't just comprised of this, and so sometimes people they have to learn what a healthy relationship is and what a healthy relationship is not. And so that's why it's important, just as students, now to the students, it's important that we become individuals that expose ourselves to different environments, different groups of individuals, different activities and events that help us become more knowledgeable, so we have, the tools to see that something is happening, or know who to send individuals to, so they can seek, some help. And so, I just wanted to add to your great point about, the environmental norms, or the quote unquote normal abnormal behavior that a lot of individuals may grow up in, and may not even understand that, this tough love that I experienced was really abuse. And so that may be the reason why they in turn are abusive to their partners, their loved ones, or their relatives. You know what I mean? And so I just felt as though that was really important to put another emphasis on, as you introduced it to us to focus on, because a lot of times that's a missing piece. And I know that, especially when working in the correctional facility, in the correctional environment, one of the things that I would hear from the male and female, detainees is, well, that's just how we grew up, and that's just what it was, and that's what I was. But what you experienced doesn't necessarily mean that it was right, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all you have to know, and that's what you have to live out. There are options, and you don't have to reciprocate the abuse. So the education is really key. And to your to the question that you mentioned, that you posed, Nija, I think that into helping an individual that might not see that they are being a victim, or may not have the confidence, that's where we start first. To Lieutenant Smith's point, we have to be encouraging. We can't be aggressive. We have to take that time to build a rapport, to let them know that they don't deserve abuse, and they have options, because we can provide all of the services that we want to individuals, but if they don't take the steps forth, or they don't feel confident to reach out to these different resources that we have for them, they're going to continue to be in their situation. And the unfortunate part about this is, some individuals never get the courage to step up and say something. So I think that's the first step for us on the other side of that table. We spend a lot of time rapport building, confidence building, self-esteem building, and educating the individual to let them know that, what, this isn't right. You don't deserve this. You do have power. You have power. And these are some things that we can do to help you exercise this power that you have, and get you safe, and get your family safe. And so I think that's one of the first steps. We definitely have to spend time, because if you come off too aggressive, you come off too imposing, you come off too passionate, that person's going to withdraw, and then they will possibly never reach out to you again, which could be dangerous.
To add to that, and this is, I guess, posed to all the panelists as well, in defining abuse. And I think a lot of the times people have misconstrued the word relationship with title. And so even with, not even just with intimate partners, when it comes down to friendship, when it comes down to the title of parents, and understanding boundaries and respect, that essentially is not necessarily required when you become an adult, but a lot of our students are transitioning from childhood to adulthood. And with that being said, they're stepping into their voice, they're stepping into their truth, they're stepping into understanding who they are. And a lot of the times, the titles with the relationships of siblings and parents and things like that is misconstrued with relationships. So if anybody can speak to that in regards to boundaries, in regards to establishing that sort of education before it even gets to the abuse side, because a lot of the times that's what I've come across, students not being really clear on what boundaries are, how to establish boundaries with their family and friends before they even establish boundaries with their partners.
I'll take that.
Oh, okay. I was just about to call you, Ashley.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's important for us to listen to what they're saying because there are reasons why they're staying in these relationships. And then not we put our little sense in like for me to say I wouldn't stay with him, I would have been gone. That type thing. We need to listen to them and give them to time to talk, and we can find out what's going on with them. And then once we find out and see if they're ready to leave, which they have to be ready. We can't say, girl, you need to go, this type thing. Listen to them. And then we start with our safety plan, which is very important because, you know, you can't tell a person to go to a shelter, and some shelters don't take pets. A lot of people are into their pets. I never really knew until this. They will not go unless Fufu can go. So if the shelter doesn't take those, you don't suggest it. If they don't take children. So this is the part where we need to listen to find out what their needs are so we can help them. Thank you.
And I think just going back to the setting of boundaries, I think it's very important, especially as teenagers and young adults, that the time is taken to actually sit down and establish what are you going to accept in a relationship, even when it comes to your friendships, when it comes to your parents, when it comes to that intimate partner. What are you willing to accept? What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you're not willing to accept? And even take the time to list out what are the characteristics, what are the qualities that you want in a relationship, that you want in a friendship. I think a lot of times people get into a toxic or unhealthy relationship simply because they don't have an idea of what it is they actually want. I'm trying to figure out what I want, and so I get into these unhealthy relationships only to find after the fact that this is not what I ever wanted. So I think taking the time to really identify and then set and really stick to your boundaries is very key.
Thank you. That's basically what I was alluding to, because when talking to some of my peers specifically, who asking them like, how do you define abuse? Like, what do you define as a relationship? Is a title in a relationship the same thing? Things like that. And a lot of the times the students are going into relationships trying to figure it out in a relationship. And then coming to terms after the fact that some of the things that they're seeing is not normal, is not what they want, is not conducive with their lifestyle, morals, values, and things like that. So I think that is important, establishing that beforehand, so that you can weed out some friends, some loved ones, and I guess prevent a lot of unnecessary hurt. But we do have a question going on to the next question that was sent. It says, oftentimes I find it's difficult for students to understand how domestic violence can have an effect on you at any age. This is directed to Chief Williams. As a college community, can you elaborate on how common domestic violence may be at the college on a collegiate level?
So I would say that, you know, domestic violence on the collegiate level is probably widespread because, you know, it's well hidden. You know, folks don't like to talk about it, things of that nature. I mean, I can go back, you know, to when I was a campus police officer at another college, which I mentioned earlier, which I won't mention now that I have to kind of out them. But we had a situation that didn't even involve students. It was actually one of the campus police officers was abusing his wife. And unfortunately, this is way back when, you know, unfortunately, there were people that would precipitate that type of behavior because the wife wanted to, you know, press charges, and the powers that be talked her out of it. And, you know, because they, you know, this guy was so well liked, and instead of, you know, assisting her, they did everything in their power to help him, you know, which was a shame because he continued, and eventually, he got charged and ended up, not only being fired, but he actually went off to prison. So that type of behavior takes place. We always hear the story, about athletes, some of these schools, a lot of money goes into their athletic program. And I'm not throwing stones at, student athletes, but, a lot of these schools, so much money is being poured in from all sources. You get the guy that's the star on the football team that's, abusing some young lady, and people are precipitating it because, he's got a career and we can't mess with that and all of that, when he needs to be, taken to task for his behavior. So again, I really encourage students, whoever you trust, whoever your group is that you trust and believe in, talk with them and let them know, especially let them know where you're going to be, when you're going to be gone, where you're going to, things like that, and just be open and honest, and young ladies probably are better at sharing stuff than guys are, but it's important to talk amongst each other and to share that information. And then it's also important, again, at a college or a university, is to know what you have available to you right there on the campus, the counseling, the support systems and everything. Sometimes there's peer support systems where it's students that will sit with you if you don't want to sit and talk with somebody that you consider a member of the college establishment. Sometimes they have these peer support groups of students that have been specially trained by folk. So I just think it's important that students learn that they're not alone. That's the big thing. You're not alone. If you need help, don't be afraid. Grab a friend who will be there to support you and come get the assistance you need.
Before we go into the resources that are available on campus, another question would be, what are some precautions that students can take to prevent, putting themselves in the position to be abused? Or what are some red flags? What are some indicators that they can look for in partners to let them identify that this may lead to an abusive situation? Because I feel like there are some precursors that students may be unaware of, or like red flags.
Is that for me or just for?
No, that's directed to anybody on the panel, actually. Anybody who would want to speak on that. I do have like an example. I was speaking to my godmom, and she is a domestic violence survivor, and she just explained to me a story when she first met her partner, who she was with for, I believe it was 30 years before she ended up getting out of the situation. But she explained how when they had first met, she was explaining to him, this was off the first meeting, that she didn't like cats at all. Like, she was terrified of cats. She didn't like cats. And then the next time she saw him, jokingly, he like threw a cat towards her direction. And she said to me, I should have known then to leave him alone, because I expressed to him how deathly afraid I am of cats. And he thought that it was funny to put me in that position. And she said, obviously, I didn't look at that as a 15-year-old girl, like, oh, this is a red flag. But had I paid attention to things like that, someone who's not paying attention to the things that I'm saying out of my mouth, maybe I would have not been in this situation for 30 years. So that's just an example of what I mean by, like, how can you pay attention to some of the things that happen before you commit yourself to a relationship with somebody and end up in an abusive situation.
That reminded me of one of my clients that I had a while ago. She was in high school, and her boyfriend was older. And she told me that he loved her so much that he called her all day, wanted to know where she was and what she was doing. So like after school, she would go out there to catch the bus, and he would be outside. And she said she would go to the store and come out the store, and he would be outside. And he would call her like every 5-10 minutes and would say, what you doing? Who you talking to? That type of thing. So after and this went on for about a year, to the point that she just got tired of it. And her parents told her, to be careful. because her parents, she told me that her parents told her that he was stalking her. But she thought he loved her because he just kept following her and talk about how much he loved her. So we had to talk through it and let her know that that's not normal for somebody to just be everywhere you go. And you come out the store and he's there and everywhere. So she finally broke up with him, which took a while. But she actually thought that he loved her that much. That's why he was everywhere she was and calling her every day and texting her while she was in school and that type thing. So we had to really talk through that for her to understand that that was it. He loved her, I'm sure, but that was a little bit more than that.
Yeah, and to speak to that point, a lot of this kind of connects, I guess, back to the concept of boundaries, because a lot of the times when you are young and you're coming from a broken home and you may lack some attention, you may lack love in certain ways. When that attention or love comes, it can be misunderstood as love when it really is something like stalking or control or things like that. And I guess that's why I'm asking the panelists to speak on this, because a lot of people who are in these positions, students who are young and just now opening themselves up to go out into the world outside of their home at 18, 19, 20, are not necessarily aware of those things being quote unquote red flags. They look at that as, affection, attention, love, and those type of concepts. So panelists.
I think what's important to pay attention to is if you find yourself just in a relationship where an individual is trying to control your being, control your time, stifle your voice, impose their will on you. See, when we're talking about healthy relationships, there is no place for individuals using manipulation to negatively control the individual. You both of you have autonomy in a relationship. Both of you have say so. And if an individual is doing anything that makes you feel negative or makes you question your self-worth or makes you question your safety, that needs to be spoken about immediately, because what you allow to happen to you could possibly increase into more aggression, more physical activity, more control, more self-esteem being torn down and denigration and things like that. So, an individual that quote unquote loves you isn't going to say things to you to make you feel bad to get what they want out of you and from you. Partners are supposed to empower one another, enhance one another, nurture one another, not punish one another, not cause an individual to feel unsafe or feel unwanted or feel hurt just to get you to do something for you. Like Ms. Greer mentioned, we're looking at a situation where an individual is trying to maintain dominance and control. And so sometimes before things become physical, they're mental, which opens up the platform for physical things to happen. So if you're in a relationship, be mindful of the liberties that your partner may begin to take. And you have to have a voice. You have to communicate, and communication is key. You have to advocate for what you're not going to stand for. And just because you may come from an environment where people are aggressive, relationships, healthy relationships have no place for aggression. Assertion is one thing, aggression is something totally different. Manipulation is something totally different. In healthy relationships, individuals don't try to manipulate you. They don't try to take advantage of you. They don't try to get a one-up on you to get you to be subservient to the desires. And again, that goes across genders, because we have just relationships in general where individuals are trying to maintain a sense of dominance, whether it's male, male, female, female, or male, female, it doesn't matter. If individuals are putting you in a situation where you are questioning your self-worth, or you are having your self-worth and self-esteem or self-concept being diminished, then those are red flags, because someone that aligns with you, that wants to grow with you and be in a relationship, they're going to do things to help raise your sense of safety, raise your sense of self worth, not the opposite.
You better preach. You better preach, brother. No, I'm just Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat from Mr. Anthony. He said, hello, I would like to ask a question to everyone. We know that parents have some control over a child's action, but at what point do we consider it to be domestic violence between a parent and a child? And great question, because this is what I was referring to when I was explaining how some people come from certain familial norms, certain abusive family upbringings that may to them be considered as normal, but to the general public or to their peers or the people that they meet in college would be labeled as abuse. Panelists.
So I'll go ahead and start the conversation with this question, answering this question. So I think the question was, when is it abusive between a parent and a child? When is that labeled as domestic violence? And I think there are a couple of things to consider. One is the age of the child. As mandated reporters, and I would imagine that many of us, I would say, on the call are mandated reporters, meaning if we know or are told that a child, a person under the age of 18, is being abused, then we have to report that. We are mandated by law to report that. Whether that child is being abused by a parent or any other family member, it is still a reportable offense. So in that aspect, that kind of takes the onus of what is it out of the picture, because clearly it's abuse defined by the state as it needs to be reported. So then as the child then becomes an adult, then we're talking about two adults who are in a domestic violence situation. And yes, then it is domestic violence, you bet. Chief Williams talked about at times having to be called for situations like that, because those are two adults who are assaulting each other, or at least one assaulting the other. And so we don't want that tolerated in our society. And so there has to be norms about what is acceptable and appropriate behavior. And certainly physical violence between individuals, whether they're family members or not, is not acceptable behavior. So those are two camps. It gets really gray when you start talking about the child is an adult and is living in the home, and there's that struggle for power. I've been in a situation where I've counseled an individual who was in a power dynamic that way and had no other place to go. And yet the situation they were in was hard, bordering on abuse. And DeVal, you make a wonderful point in terms of starting off as manipulation and mental anguish and mental abuse. Can easily that's a slippery slide into physical. And so having to work with that person within those confines, that's a very difficult situation. They either have to stay and learn how to cope, or they have to go somewhere else where maybe there's no room, maybe it's a shelter, maybe it's their car. So there are some hard decisions that have to be made when you're talking about domestic violence within family members, particularly with the power dynamic of power of parent and child.
Thank you for that. Okay, so at this point, we do have I guess some like leftover questions that we can get to since we have a little bit of time, and then we'll open it up to, I guess, if anybody has any additional questions. But what are some resources that are available at the college, and how can students hold themselves accountable for their choices, actions, and relationships? Panelists.
So I can touch on the accountability piece. It goes back to what we said earlier, is just knowing what you want out of a relationship, knowing what you want out of a friendship. I think so often, as has been discussed eloquently on this call, is that we tend to normalize abuse. And once you know better, you now have a responsibility to do better. So if you're engaging in formats like this, now you have the information. Now it's your choice whether or not you're going to use the information or keep repeating the cycle that you grew up in. So that's how you hold yourself accountable. That's how you take responsibility for your actions in your friendships and your relationships. And it also goes back to the whole self-esteem and self-worth. Know that you are worthy of those characteristics that you want. If you want respect, if you want love, you want good communication, you are more than worthy of that. Don't settle for less. Don't get into an unhealthy place because you think this is all I'm ever worthy of. This is all I've known. This is all mom and dad had. So this is all I'm going to accept. No, accept those characteristics that you want. You are worthy of that.
And I know we grow up in a time where everybody's like, like not everybody, but our generation is like, I don't need nobody. I can get it on my own. But I think it's important to have an accountability partner. I think it's always good to have somebody who's, your friends just can't be yes people. It has to be somebody there to be like, no, you should have never said that, or no, you definitely lied, or, to call you out on your stuff. And I feel like that will help you become more accountable because you'll have somebody around that's looking out for your best interests, but also not going to be a yes man. So that's just my own piece.
And Naja, that's an excellent point, because when you think about it,
okay.
when you think about it, to have a person isolated away from a support system, away from family and friends and loved ones that's going to advocate for them, is what helps a perpetrator of abuse continue the environment to continued abuse. So, it's easy for individuals to suffer in silence. And we've also, we've already discussed how being a victim of abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional, it's easy for an individual to begin to socially withdraw. It's easy for an individual to disassociate themselves and isolate. And that's not where you want to be. That's where the perpetrator wants you to be, because you don't have access to an alliance and you don't have access to resources that's going to show you that you have the confidence and the strength to change your environment. And more importantly, not just change your environment, do something that will prevent this particular perpetrator of the violence to no longer be able to do that, not only to you, but to anybody else that may fall prey to their behaviors. So, it's very important. And, being responsible means that if you see something, say something. If you have a friend that is being abused, whether it's male or female, don't just sit back and let that happen without saying anything. I'm not telling you to get, thoroughly involved, that you put yourself in harm's way. But what I'm saying is, don't be a spectator. Don't just sit and just watch it happen. We were talking, you raised the question about resources of who you can talk to. There's the chief and there's Lieutenant Smith, their department. There's the Violence Prevention Center. There's counseling services. There's the Wellness Center. There are any student organizations that have advisors, so you can contact a host of different people, even if you need an alliance to help a student or to help a friend. But the one thing that we can't do is just sit and know something is happening or have an inkling that something is happening and just do nothing and be silent about it or look a blind eye, because realistically that's helping perpetuate the domestic violence.
And I think it's also sorry, I just wanted to say, I think it's also important to ask questions. And I don't just mean this in regards to domestic violence. I just mean in general, because a lot of the times people see something and they presume, or they see something and they can speak on something without really understanding the facts. So rather than be like, assume something or presume something about somebody, you can just ask, are you okay? You look a little down, like, to make them feel comfortable enough to express, versus them being like, girl, you always looking tired when you leave there. That sort of like presumptuous or like judgmental like demeanor will push somebody away from being open. So I always advocate to kids and anybody that I know to just ask me a question directly, because you might not know where I'm coming from. So don't presume. And that might, allow somebody to be comfortable enough to give a person more insight on what's going on behind closed doors.
Absolutely. It looks like we have another question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I was about to point that out. What are some of the reasons why domestic abusers commit abuse in their relationships?
I think there are a number of reasons why domestic abusers commit abuse in their relationships. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. Sometimes that is the norm and that is all that individuals have seen. So that is the behavior they tend to replicate in their own relationship. Not saying that it's okay and not excusing that behavior, but when that's all we know, that's what people tend to repeat until someone addresses and says that is not okay. That is unhealthy behavior. So that is one of the main reasons. Also, just sometimes it's substance abuse. It's just a lot of different reasons. It's, again, exercising that power and that control over another individual. I don't know if anyone else wants to share on that.
I was just going to add to what you were saying. In some of my psychology classes, they talk about how most of the things that happen in our adulthood is connected to our childhood. So a lot of the times there's, unaddressed traumas, there's neglect, there's certain things that may have manifested in childhood that result into a person growing up to become angry, a person growing up to become timid or more inclined to be abused and things like that. So I think childhood plays a major role in why some people grow up to feel like they have to abuse or to be in a position to be abused. It varies across the spectrum, upbringing, familial dynamics, attachment from childhood up into adulthood and things like that.
And that's a really good point. And it goes back to that old phrase, hurt people. And so sometimes, unfortunately, even those who have been abused in their childhood or even in adulthood, they then themselves, in order to take back the power and the control that they lost in that abuse situation, now they become the abuser. So that's another thing also.
And as far as the peer pressure, and it's not always guys, but the young ladies or the young men will abuse their partners because they want to be like the macho person in the group. So I have had young ladies that say that her boyfriend beats her because his friends, it's like a game to them. So as much as he beats her or tells her to sit down and she'll go do that, then he's the macho person of the group. So that happens a lot with the peer pressure.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just to add to that, I think that when we're not looking at an individual that grew up maybe experiencing a direct sense of abuse, we also have gender role stereotypes that play a role in possibly perpetuating abuse. You know, there are these gender role stereotypes on what a man is supposed to be, how he's supposed to govern his home, what a woman is supposed to be, how she's supposed to, you know, align in that situation, that are really not based on any fact, but based on a stereotype that may encourage an individual to try to gain dominance and power in their relationship based off of these false perceptions of what the man's role is and what the woman's role is. And again, when we're looking at relationships, that could be brother to brother, meaning my older brother, younger brother, older sister, younger brother, older brother, younger sister, cousin, uncle, aunt, uncle, or intimate partner. You know, so that also plays a role into, you know, perpetuating why some people may commit abuse in their relationship as well.
I think the last thing I'd like to add to that particular discussion question would be the idea, and you touched upon it a little bit, Deval, when we're talking about domestic violence is not just in heterosexual relationships, that it's also in the LGBTQ plus community. And with it being within those communities as well, we have to introduce the idea of internal homophobia and how that in itself can play a role in abuse within a relationship. And what I mean by that, having counseled individuals around this particular dynamic, what I mean by that is not fully being comfortable with who you are in terms of your own sexuality and identity. And so then you project that sense of not belonging, or that sense of guilt or shame, and you project that onto your partner. It may come out manipulative, it may come out abusive, it may come out in the physical sense as well. So I just didn't want to have the discussion without particularly interjecting that dynamic as well, in terms of why people may become batterers.
Noted. Anybody else have anything to add before we open up the discussion to the people? So I would say, as like a wrap up question, or what is, I guess everybody on the panel, is if you could think of one piece of advice to share to those who either are in an abusive situation, may have been in an abusive situation, or know somebody in an abusive situation. What is one piece of advice that you would give to them to assist them with the journey towards survival and peace?
So for me, I would just say that the person has to really understand that there is support out there. They shouldn't think that they are alone, or they shouldn't feel embarrassed. Oh my God, I stayed in this relationship so long. Nobody's going to understand that. And, you know, I'm not going to have any help to get out of this. That's not the case. So I really encourage anybody, you know, male or female, whatever, to, you know, step out there and you will find support. You will find support. You will find help. You are not alone. Don't stay in something that you know in your heart of heart is toxic and dangerous for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
I like to say, if you're a witness and you see it, you know, we need more bystander intervention. Speak up, say something. Let that person know that you're there for them. Starting October 1st for the entire month of October, and this is a good way to get involved, Purple Light Nights, is lighting up purple. You can put a purple light bulb and a lamp in your window or on your house porch, and you let your neighbors know, you let someone know that if they are in a domestic violence situation, they can come to you. Your house, your home is a safety net from where they can get away if they need to. Just putting things out there where they know that I can go to this person and I can talk to them, but never pressure the person. Give them the opportunity to come to you by putting that information out there.
Thank you.
That's great. And my encouragement to the one experiencing a domestic violence situation, or even to the one who has already come out of it, is that there's hope for you in the situation. There's resources, there's services available. This is not the end. There is life after. And for the one who has already made it out of the situation, who is just wondering, what does life after look like? There is life after. There's support groups available. There are survivors who are willing to share their stories and kind of give you the next steps for how to continue to live an amazing life after domestic violence. Your life does not end with the abuse. There is hope. So that's my encouragement.
Thank you. And I meant to compliment your shirt earlier. Very cute shirt.
Thank you.
I think it's important, and I mentioned this before, to listen to them, because it is what we would like them to do. Of course, we want them to leave, but if they're not ready to leave, they're gonna go back and forth. The numbers say that they at least go back 7 times before they leave a relationship. That's a lot of times to go back to someone and just backwards and forth, and it puts your life in danger. So we need to listen to them, what they want to do. And after we listen to them, give them the appropriate resources, because all the resources are not for the same person. So find out what they want to do and help them with the resources. And don't just tell them, but maybe take them to the shelter or give them a safety plan and let them know what they need to do. Take your medicine, get your all your paperwork together, and just help them along. Thank you.
Thank you. I think is that everybody on the panel? Who else didn't get no advice? Oh, I was coming for you. I'm like,
My piece of advice is for, individuals in the beginning stages of this. If you have any questions about anything that's happening in your relationship, seek out somebody that's impartial. Seek out somebody that's impartial and ask questions, like a counselor, a faculty, a staff. Like, don't go to somebody that's verbally abusive already, or someone that may not give you the best judgment. Reach out to a counselor, reach out to a faculty person, reach out to an advisor, reach out to one of the campus officers and just ask some questions, and they could possibly segue and lead you into information that could help you see red flags before things become an even worse exacerbated situation. So if you have any questions, or if you're feeling anything that doesn't seem right, then reach out and just ask some questions. There are a ton of places that you can go, but you want to ask someone that doesn't really benefit off of telling you something to keep you in a distorted space or manipulated space. Someone that's going to genuinely give you the honest information, because that's just the right thing to do.
and I think that's important because a lot of people do seek advice from their peers and from people who know them, their day ones, and that's kind of where they get their insight from on what abuse is and what they should do and how they should carry their relationships. But oftentimes when you share your story with a stranger or a person who is experienced in human behavior, like a psychiatrist, psychologist, a therapist, or something like that, you'll get an objective advice and not advice that is geared towards one direction or another. So I think that's important. I think that's everybody. Kim, you have any final farewell words?
No, everybody did a great job, and then I just like to thank everybody once again for participating. Um, to my panelists, thank you, Dr. Bryant, for all the hard work you have done to help facilitate this event and your contribution as a panelist as well. Thank you, Mr. Kent, Miss Greer, Nurse Shelton, Chief Williams, and Lieutenant Smith. Everybody was great.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to sit in and participate. I appreciate it.
Thank you to everybody.
So is that a wrap? Should I have you record? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. So like I don't know. Am I supposed to like remix it out?
Silly Naja.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all. At this time, I will stop the recording.
Have a blessed day, everybody. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
And find your purpose.
Bye.